right. So, just so we're clear, I have had lots of discussions and debates, and a lot of times I'm very patient. Just I won't. If I cut you off, I'll apologize, but I rarely do that unless you're stacking a lot of questions, and I'll like, can I answer one by one? I won't do the same with you, and we can just have a back and forth and go from there. Okay.
No problem.
So I guess we start off with critical race theory. I'm for it. You're against it. I mean, you're for it. I'm against it. So can you tell me what you think critical race theory is?
So I want to start by saying I know there have been a number of people who have spoken on the topic, and I'm not really aware of everything that everyone says. I can only sort of speak from my perspective and the own research that I've done. So do keep that in mind. I've listened to a number of people talk about the subject, and they're like, "Oh, well, what about this thing that this person said?" And I'm like, "Well, I can't speak to that, and I don't know the context of what they say, so I'm not going to try and defend that."
Oh,
But
okay.
my personal view is it's just an analytical lens used to see what the effect of how. Sorry, I'm kind of nervous. I don't do this very much.
That's okay.
It's a lens used to see what the effect of race has on certain power structures. That's sort of just like the very, very basic 101 sort of definition. You can go into various other things of sort of what you can get from that.
That's not what I've experienced, and that's definitely not what is being taught in school. My
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
So I've heard a lot of people say that like these things are being taught in school, but when I look around, I rarely, if ever, see that. I know in certain disciplines it's taught on like the college level, but when it's talked about in like the context of like say grade school, I tend to see people upset because they're talking about like American history in a context that doesn't sort of, for lack of a better term, sterilize certain things that happened. So I'm just curious as to when you say like what you've seen like in schools, could you explain to me what that really entails?
Yes, what they're teaching is that white people are inherently and genetically bad and racist, and they cannot help but be that way according to their whiteness, and that black people will be victims of this, and no matter what black people will do, they have to, black people have to be aware that white people are going to be their number one enemy, that they're going to be the one that will always subjugate us, oppress us, attack us because of their inherent racism, based upon their lack of melanin. you know, it's that philosophy of white man bad, black man good.
So just out of curiosity, and if you want to like, if you have an example of this, you can feel free to send it to me later. Like, I don't want to just like throw that at you. But, like, I've been in academia myself, and I have like never seen anything to that degree. So I'm just sort of curious where that's coming from. I've heard people say that, and like, I will admit there's people in certain sort of circles, like even on the certain left circles, I've heard people try and say that, all white people are bad and all they're evil. And I've even gotten shit for that, saying that that's not true. That being said, I think one of the things to remember is it's important to separate whiteness from white people because whiteness is a concept and white people, quote, quote, is a group of people.
Is whiteness being taught in school?
as far as I can tell, not really. The only thing that I've
What
seen
is
in
whiteness? Sorry
school,
for interrupting. I need to be clear on what whiteness
so
is.
whiteness in the way that we sort of see it today is a, I think calling it an institution might be taking it too far, but it's sort of a bubble that creates an in group and an out group. So, for example, one of the things that whiteness, quote, quote, did was for a long period of time, there were people who were Europeans that some people would call white, weren't considered white by the standards of the day. So the Irish, the Italians, in some cases Scandinavians, even the Germans, these people weren't considered whites. But as time went on, the definition of whiteness sort of expanded. But it stopped when it came to the Chinese, obviously the slaves, and even in some cases Jews, because some people love to throw the Jews under the bus whenever they can.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been certain exclusionary policies as a result of this that sort of has caused Jim Crow, a lot of the unequal outcomes that we see today, and certain aspects of this understanding sort of exists within various systems of the country.
Did whiteness cause Jim Crow, or did racist white people? Because then we're doing a hashtag all then, because then that's exactly what I want everyone to get away from, is that, oh, well, everybody who's white owe reparations because, slavery, which there's no proof that every white person in America is a descendant of a slave owner, just like there's no proof of every black person is a descendant of slaves. So you did have evil white people do the Jim Crow, but there were white people in the North who were against that and fighting that, but they all are part of whiteness, right? So this is that broad term, that's that catch all that I don't. I would never subscribe to the terminology of whiteness, just like I would never subscribe to the terminology of blackness.
So when it comes to slaves, it's one thing you have to sort of keep in mind that the lots of people will, for example, say that, a small number of people were sort of slave owners. But even that's not true. It's actually, I think it was somewhere like 30 to 40%. But even that, for the purpose of this conversation, is largely irrelevant. The thing I would say is that there are the slaves and their descendants, 100% of them were sort of the victims of slavery and the institutions that came after it. So you kind of can't necessarily um, disregard that fact. But I would also say you rightfully point out that there were people that did that sort of were on the sides of the slaves and they wanted to free them, and you have to take that into consideration. But at the same time, the concept of whiteness, that it sort of, how do you put it, that sort of doesn't matter within the concept of general whiteness, because even those people who were sort of on their sides, there was sort of a benefit. A good example of this that I had with someone is whiteness it's sort of like a race. If you have to run 100 meters, it's not that like white people have to run, well, they have to run less, but they're still running the 100 yards, while people who don't get sort of the benefit of whiteness have to sort of stack on like an extra 20 or 30 or something along those lines. And even if people can sort of benefit from whiteness without actually being malicious. And in some cases, to be fair, they don't. Like, there's people like to say, oh, there are poor whites too. And that's true, but that sort of still doesn't address how being a member of the outgroup in the country sort of affected slaves and their descendants.
How did white people in Maryland benefit from the quote unquote whiteness that started, like, I just so we're clear, I reject the premise that whiteness caused Jim Crow. So, but
Well,
hold on. But I want to, you said that even though white people, and here we go, you just proving my point about CRT, it's including everybody white. And the thing about it is that there is no broad brush. So the my argument, which has not been debunked at the moment, there were racist white people that caused Jim Crow. And you said it was caused by whiteness. And I said, I disregard whiteness because there were white people who had nothing to do with Jim Crow. And then you said that there are white people who benefited from Jim Crow. So my question to you is, how did white people in the free states benefit from Jim Crow that happened in the South?
so the way this works is, and I want to be clear, sort of whiteness is just sort of, I was speaking as whiteness is the in-group out-group dynamic. It's not that sort of whiteness sort of didn't cause anything, and we can talk about this later, and this is more of like a history thing, but the American sort of the concept of American racism as we know it is actually has more to do with sort of, well, never mind. I'll get to that part later. But it's really kind of tricky to explain because it's sort of like we have a situation where we're all supposed to be equal, we're all supposed to be free, yet some people are more free, if that makes sense. That's why I was using the analogy that being white
How did
doesn't
they
necessarily
benefit?
give you.
I need to hear the benefits that they received from Jim Crow.
So the benefit is that you don't actually have something holding you back in certain regards. So a good example of this, and this is a personal anecdote, but it's something that happened to a lot of people. After World War II, there were a lot of black veterans that came back. Something that they were sort of owed for their service was the GI Bill. But what ended up happening is because of the way these things function, the black GIs got sort of these they were put into these sort of lesser programs, trade programs, and they weren't given sort of schools. They weren't given the ability to buy these sort of like low cost housing that a lot of the GIs got. It's things like this that are like every every step of the way, even in situations where you should sort of be equal, there's still that gap there, and it exists when it shouldn't. And I sort of want to be clear about one other thing that I heard you say.
No,
When it
hold
comes
on.
to,
Please
oh,
don't stack.
sorry,
Please don't stack, because
oh, sorry, sorry,
I'm I want to stay on the benefit here because I'm actually rejecting this.
okay.
So you said that the reason how white people in the North benefited from the Jim Crow was because they're not victims of it, but so were a lot of free blacks. There were free blacks that were not a victim of it. If you did not live in the South, you were not a victim or the beneficiary of Jim Crow. So therefore, the whole premise of whiteness is something that all white people benefit from when it comes to Jim Crow is just really false, because that was something that happened to these particular people. It did not happen to black people who were free in free states. And therefore, no one that was outside of these southern areas that had Jim Crow were either the victim or the beneficiary of Jim Crow.
So I have to say I don't really agree with that. There were a number of cases, even in northern states, where the people were free, but the people in the northern states were still racist. Even during the days before the Civil War, the abolitionists, even in the northern free states, had a really hard time gaining ground because the sentiment at the time was that, well, blacks are lesser than whites. They don't necessarily deserve to be slaves. And unfortunately, that caused a lot of issues. And in some cases, a lot of people had their eyes open as times went on, which is good. But the sort of the problems that exist within the country due to the racial divide, and this is even predating Jim Crow, these things still held the freemen back.
Okay. You just moved the goalposts because you went from Jim
No,
Crow. Hold on, I'm going to show you how you did it. You went from, remember, I said that I reject your statement that white people benefited from Jim Crow. And how I stated that by saying, because white people and black people were not underneath those states that were implementing Jim Crow. So they were not the beneficiary or the victim of Jim Crow. And you said you disagree with that. And then you went on to racism instead of showing me how the Jim Crow laws affect the free blacks in the North when it doesn't. It
sure.
doesn't.
So I can explain if you want that specific thing. So
But I
even in
need
the
you to be
North,
specific. Hold
there
on. I need you to show me how Jim Crow laws in the South. Please don't go on to the, oh, well, these black people couldn't eat in this white restaurant, or these black people couldn't drink at this particular country club's thing, or if they were. We're talking about Jim Crow laws. You said that was based upon whiteness, and you played it with a broad brush. And so I'm rejecting this. And so I'm saying that Jim Crow laws had nothing to do with white people in the North that were in areas that did not have Jim Crow laws, and it definitely didn't affect the blacks. And you said it does. So I need you to show me how laws in these states, the Jim Crow laws in these states, affected free blacks and that white people benefited from them in northern states.
Sure. So one of the big issues that was a Jim Crow policy was redlining.
Was
You
what?
had situations
Was
where
what? No, I didn't. What?
sorry,
You said it so fast. I'm so seriously. I didn't hear what you said.
sure. So the issue that blacks in the North had was redlining. Are you familiar with that?
Redlining was not under, and I can go look at Jim Crow, but this is what I understand Jim Crow to be. And you have to show me evidence that redlining was a thing that was considered a Jim Crow law. This is Jim Crow laws, okay? Jim Crow law was that black people had to pass a very crazy test in order to vote. I actually have a copy of that test on my Tree of Logic website, that black people were not allowed to sit in the front of the bus with white people, that black people were not allowed to drink from the same water fountain, that they have to be segregated. This is what I'm talking about, Jim Crow laws. I have never, and I would like you to provide evidence that redlining was a Jim Crow law.
So okay, so I can get something for you and send it to you, but I'll just say this: Jim Crow laws there were a number of them, and it wasn't necessarily like the specific thing for Jim Crow law. So, these are only Jim Crow law. So, for example, another Jim Crow, or this was actually, I suppose you can call it a policy more than a law, and I spoke on it before, was that the black GIs weren't allowed to buy homes in the areas that were designated for GIs.
That wasn't a Jim Crow law, though. This one say that's not Jim Crow. You understand? Like that's red. That is. I'm not going to deny redlining. I don't want us to get off on Jim Crow laws, because you understand a lot of blacks during that time. Well, again, we're talking about black people who had just been freed not too long ago from slavery. Their moms were born and their parents were born in slavery. I needed, because remember, I want to go back to, because we did move away from it. Remember, my original rejection is you stated that whiteness is the cause of Jim Crow, and that whites that were in the North that had nothing to do with Jim Crow benefited from it. And then you also said that blacks were also victims of Jim Crow laws. You cannot be a victim of Jim Crow laws if Jim Crow laws were not in the state that you resided in as a free black. Now, you can say racism or discrimination. I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm sticking on the term of Jim Crow laws. Every state did not have Jim Crow laws.
So this is going to be something that I'm going to have to send you later because I think we're having a fundamental disagreement with sort of what counts as a Jim Crow law.
Well, I
because
can look
in
it up
all the
really
research
quick.
I've
I mean, it's really cut and dry what Jim Crow laws are. Like, what is Jim Crow laws? And then also, after I do that, I can look at the states that had Jim Crow laws in it. So here's Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were a collection of states and local statutes that legalize racial segregation. Now, let me look at the states that had the Jim Crow laws. List of states that had Jim Crow laws. Okay, so here we have the list of states that had Jim Crow laws. We have Alabama, Arizona, we have Georgia, we have Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, so Mississippi, Louisiana, let's see, Oklahoma, really? Hold on a second, let me look at that. Yeah, Oklahoma. So we're seeing that there are some states that had Jim Crow laws, and there are states that did not have Jim Crow laws. So do you understand where I'm saying that? I'm gonna make it plain, and then we can move on to another one. But you're saying, like, for example, did you know in Georgia that it is against the law to perform fellatio? It's not enforced, but it is a law. And so what you're saying is that the law here in Georgia affects single people in California. It doesn't. It's a law that affects, just like I gave you the definition, it is a law that affects a collection of states and local statutes. So the states that are implemented in one state or even in one town does not affect another state. That's not how America is ran. We have different states.
So I understand what you're saying, but the issue that I have with this is more the fact that there were a number of segregation laws that were around, even in the North. And every time I've ever been in a history class or I've discussed this and I've looked it up, those are cataloged under the umbrella of Jim Crow. Now, if you want, you can say that there are sort of these other laws that you may not consider quote, quote, Jim Crow, and that's fine. But I think at that point, we're kind of playing a semantic game, because the problem I have is that these sort of laws and policies were put on the books to again reinforce sort of this in-group out-group and keep white and black people apart.
Okay, but it's still.
And that
sorry. No, sorry.
And that happened throughout the northern states as well. It even happened in California.
Okay, Jim Crow laws were not throughout every state in America. That is not true.
So can I cut you off for a second?
Yes.
I want to be clear about this, because I'm talking about a number of policies that were in pretty much. I would need to do more research to see if there were states that didn't sort of do like redlining, But in most major metropolitan areas throughout the country, that was a policy that was kept on the books, and you can even actually still see that from today.
I'm not going to dispute
But
the redlining. What you're doing is conflating everything together underneath the umbrella of Jim Crow. I want us to,
no,
I want us to, the whole argument is Jim Crow law. And you're
well,
saying, okay, go ahead, sorry.
yeah. So I just want to be again very very clear about what I'm saying. That every time I've spoken to a researcher whose life work has been doing this, and I've actually studied under a few, mind you, it was just in their history class, but again, that was just through my own education. It's been very, very clear that those policies were considered Jim Crow. And I don't think it's conflating one law with the other because Jim Crow, if you want to say, sort of boil down, well, what is Jim Crow? It's a series of segregation laws. And whether they were done sort of on a state level, on a like county level or city level, or even a block level doesn't really matter much. It's the fact that sort of they were done, and they were done all over the country.
Okay,
So if
okay, hold on. Your experience is
okay.
anecdotal. No true, reputable historian will ever stand by the term, but will stand by the notion that Jim Crow was implemented throughout the entire, that Jim Crow laws were implemented throughout the entire United States. That is false. And Jim Crow laws was not laws that were implemented throughout the United States. That is a lie. Jim Crow laws were in specific states, mainly in the South. This is a historical fact. And what I don't want to happen here, because this is what you're doing, you are conflating other racial discriminations that blacks have experienced in the past with Jim Crow laws. That's not true. You can't do that. That's kind of being disingenuous. We're sticking with Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws was not something that was given to every black person throughout every state of the United States of America. That just is not true.
So this is just going to have to be an impasse because, as I've said, when I've looked into this situation, that's been my understanding. Now you can trying to sort of split up like broader segregation and Jim Crow is, I mean, you can do that, but all of my own personal research and when I've spoken to people who are researchers in this field, they've taken all sort of these segregation policies have been put under Jim Crow. Now, if you feel that like only sort of policy 1, 2, 3, and 4 are Jim Crow and everything else is just sort of like rank and file segregation,
Okay, I get where you're going.
I'm trying to be very, very clear about what I'm telling you.
I can repeat back exactly what you're saying. What you don't understand what I'm saying. I'm gonna show you how I know exactly what you're saying. Let me repeat it back to you, and please correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that based upon these people that you have heard that said that the racial discrimination that blacks have received throughout America are Jim Crow laws. And am I wrong?
Yeah, you are wrong.
Okay.
I'll repeat it.
Okay.
So
But
there
hold
are
on.
a number.
Okay, wait. Now repeat what I'm saying then, because if I misunderstood you, then you must have misunderstood me. So repeat what I'm saying.
So you're specifically saying that Jim Crow was something that was localized to the South, and it was a specific number of policies, redlining not being one of them.
No, I'm saying that there were things that were specifically titled Jim Crow laws, and there were specific laws or policies that fell underneath Jim Crow laws that were predominantly in the South and that were labeled Jim Crow laws. What you are doing is that you're taking other discriminatory things that were not laws. They were just basically could be business policies where they don't allow black co-workers and white co-workers to eat together. And you're labeling that to be Jim Crow law. And what I'm saying is that was not Jim Crow law. There are specific Jim Crow laws. And I also notice you take the law off of it and you just go Jim Crow. And I'm keeping, because that's what I started with, Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws. And you're taking the law off and go, well, these are redlining is under Jim Crow. And I'm like, it was not under Jim Crow. The redlining that has happened, let's say, for instance, the redlining that happened in Missouri, if there is a redlining in Missouri, I don't know. It didn't happen under even no Jim Crow law. It could have happened. I'll even say a lot of redlining happened, but it did not. You have no proof that it happened underneath Jim Crow law. You cannot show me where that was a Jim Crow law. That's what I am saying. It's very specific what I'm saying right there.
Okay, so I'll say this and then we can move on.
Okay.
And I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but I just want to be super, super, super clear about what I'm saying.
Okay.
That throughout all of my research, all of my academic career, there have been a number of things highlighted that people have called Jim Crow. Now, you can say that these things weren't Jim Crow, but if you want to say that, these things that were racist policy, that were discriminatory policies, weren't Jim Crow, then the conversation becomes the title of Jim Crow becomes largely a moot point, and we can discuss this in terms of the general segregation that happened in America from roughly the end of the Civil War to, depending on which part of the country you're in, somewhere around like the 1980s or 1990s in some cases.
And you did it again. What did you just do again? What did What did I accuse you of doing? And you did it again. Tell me what I accused you of doing.
You're trying to say that I'm broadening.
No. What did I accuse you of doing? And you proved my point by doing it again. You did something very specific.
What, that I'm saying that things that aren't Jim Crow are Jim Crow?
No, I said you purposely leave out law. And I have always said from the time we talked, I never go Jim Crow. I say Jim Crow laws. I stay consistent. You don't. You take out the law part because you can name it. And that's what CRT does. See, you take the law part out because you understand that laws are specific. Because you can turn anything that's a policy, and if I say law, then if a business policy, then that's not a law, and that basically just debunks your argument. But I stayed on the statement of Jim Crow laws. When you listen to this over again, you'll hear me stay consistent. Jim Crow laws, Jim Crow laws. What you do is go, well, based upon what I've been taught and what I've been heard and the books I've read, that the redlining was falling under Jim Crow. But you don't say Jim Crow laws purposely because it was not a Jim Crow law. I am specific when I say Jim Crow laws, and you just take the law off because you did it again. So now what you're doing, what I said you're doing is you're conflating, okay, by making something broad, and that's that whiteness thing. And if you want to keep going on into this, we can, but because I do want to get into the slavery thing. But that's what you do is you make something so broad instead of something specific. Calling something Jim Crow can be anything versus calling something a Jim Crow law.
So you're trying to, from what I can tell, you're very carefully trying to separate we'll call them, for lack of a better term, laws and policies.
No,
For
I've
the
been
people living through
consistent
these.
on history. Remember what we was talking about earlier? believe it or not, you mentioned Jim Crow laws. And I'll actually repeat it to you really quick. And I apologize, but because I'm ready to get on the next subject. But you said that Jim Crow laws affect white white people in the North benefit from Jim Crow laws, and that blacks are a victim of it. And I said, how is that possible when they don't even live in these areas? And then that's when we started to debate from that area, because that's how we started to get into the actual back and forth, is because I rejected the notion that white people who did not live in the areas that had Jim Crow laws were benefiting from Jim Crow laws. And I also rejected the notion that free blacks who did not live in states or local areas that had implemented Jim Crow laws were victims of Jim Crow law. But in order for your argument to win, you have to take the law part of it and just have it as Jim Crow, which can mean anything. Basically, calling a black person an N-word could be a Jim Crow thing, according to you. But I am specific with a legislation, a law. This was laws. These were legal laws.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yes, actually, I'm finished. Go ahead. Sorry.
So when I came on here, as I've said before, I was discussing Jim Crow under the context of legalized segregation. And this, whether it's sort of legal by business, these things were empowered by the law. It was allowed by the country, and a lot of these policies, I won't even say laws, I'll call them policies now, I'll be very clear.
But I'm calling laws, so we're the impasse, because I'm not going by policies. You took it from law to policies. I stayed on laws, because the whole thing was the Jim Crow law. And this is something you said, that the people, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Please. So again, I'll back up and state it again. When I said Jim Crow laws or whatever, I was speaking to the overall system of American racism that existed post-Civil War. Now, if you want to get very, very specific into sort of what sort of was and wasn't Jim Crow, we can do that. But
don't do that.
Goal of me coming on here.
Laws.
No. Because
I'm saying laws. You are making it broad. I'm specific. Jim Crow laws.
So let me ask you a question. What is the relevance of saying, well, this was a law and this was a policy, because I'm talking about things that happened that affected blacks, and even if it sort of didn't, affected blacks in a negative way.
Great question.
Through America for over 100 years.
Because
what's the difference?
I'll tell you. When black people lived in areas that had the Jim Crow laws, these were enforced laws that were legalized. And when you get into policies, and I'm not going to call them Jim Crow, because they were not named Jim Crow. These were just racial policies. But guess what? Every black didn't go through all of the racial policies. These were not policies that were implemented on certain black people. It was not. But laws is a legal thing that actually is enforced on every black person that lives in that area where that jurisdiction is legal. So that's why I stay specific on Jim Crow law and not Jim Crow, because you could take something, like I said, you could take a Jim Crow policy. You could say, and I reject the whole thing of Jim Crow policy, but you can take something that's really a racist issue, like a black person being called the N-word, and then say, oh, that's a Jim Crow. And I'll say, but that's not a Jim Crow law. There is no Jim Crow law that says that every black person has to be called the N-word. That's the difference. And I have to be very specific whenever I discuss with someone. We're discussing actually, because that's something I'm always aware of, that people on the left do, is conflate issues. And I stay specific on one thing. Jim Crow laws. I didn't even embrace your policy. I stayed specific on Jim Crow laws because a law is totally different than a policy. You don't. And one last thing: if a black person breaks the policy, they don't go to jail. But if you break Jim Crow law, you go to jail. That's the difference.
Yeah, but if you break a Jim Crow policy, you end up getting lynched. And that's sort of
it depends on the situation, and we can go on to that another time. Because every black person, the whole thing of all blacks were downtrodden. I reject this.
So please, I have to stop you there. So when we talk about these topics, we talk about groups of people. There are definitely blacks that weren't quote downtrodden,
right?
But we're talking about a high majority of them that were.
Right. And we can get into why that is. We can get into, hold on, because there was I wrote down two things you said, and I wanted to I wanted to do the Jim Crow law thing first. And so is it safe to say that you understand that I'm talking about Jim Crow laws and that you are talking about policies that you want to call Jim Crow?
I mean, as I said, I was talking specifically about segregation policies, and I will sort of give it to you that when I came in, I was specifically talking about segregation policies, and if you want to say that I misused Jim Crow, you are more than welcome to do that.
Yeah,
but
we can talk about segregation policies. Absolutely, yeah. You will never hear me try to debunk you on segregation policies. Absolutely not. I just wanted to make sure we didn't conflate the laws that were happening in the majority of the southern states versus other states. So that's the reason why we were stuck on that issue alone. The second thing I wanted that you stated, and I wrote it down because I knew we was going to probably spend some time on the Jim Crow law thing, is that you said that, and I wrote it down, you said that I am a victim of slavery. Can you tell me how I am a victim of slavery?
I'm sorry, I don't recall saying that.
You were saying, hold on, please, if I'm misquoting you, please let me know. But when I said, how are black people when we get back to the Jim Crow law thing, but this is the only way I can explain why I wrote this down. You said that when blacks who don't live in areas that have Jim Crow laws are victim of it, you begin to talk about the racist areas or certain circumstances that they encounter. And that this has been gone from slavery, where we have been victims of, that we're all victims of you mentioned something about institution, and then that's when you said something that we're all victims of slavery, and I wrote that down when you said it. And this is kind of reason why I had that rule of no stacking, because if you make several points and I write down, because you only made 2 points, in all fairness, you only made 2 points. And the 2 points I wrote down and I prevented you from making a third one, was the beneficiary of whites benefiting from Jim Crow laws, and then victims of blacks being victims of slavery. And that's all I wrote. So I will apologize. If I hear you making more than 1 point again, I'm going to just have to interrupt you, because I don't want. So we'll just go ahead and forget that, since you don't remember it.
One question though.
Huh? Uh-huh.
So earlier, I made a what do you call it? Running the cross country Olympic running analogy. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Can you explain what you think I meant by making that point or bringing that up?
I heard you mention it, and I could not understand how it was even related to blacks experiencing racial discrimination equivalent to the blacks the Jim Crow laws that blacks were experiencing in the South when it was a legislation. So when I was listening to your analogy, it just didn't make sense to me because there were two different things. Because there are blacks who were not experiencing any type of racial discrimination in certain areas. Now, I can go get you, but those are now I wouldn't even say anecdotal. There were areas where blacks were allowed to run businesses. There were areas where blacks were allowed to have, and plus blacks don't want it, and let's talk about the segregation thing. Blacks did not want to live in white areas. And so they did make their own housing areas with them, around themselves. So that's the reason why I just didn't see it was relevant. But if you want to show me how it was relevant, you can, but I guess we can just go ahead and say that blacks today don't suffer from slavery, right? We can just go ahead and say that's not the case.
Okay. So I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as I can. If we can say, this is going to get abstract, so just please keep that in mind. So if you want to say that in America, in order to sort of succeed, whatever that means, in some cases it's owning a house, owning business or whatever, you go sort of from 0 to 100 in some sort of way. And in the case of the policies that were the result of the post-Civil War in America, for the most part, there are, of course, going to be cases. You can, of course, point to cases where some people didn't have it as hard as others. But for a white person who, we'll say poor or maybe even sort of middle class to make it, they had to work sort of what you would expect it to be in order to make it sort of out of poverty or to move up a rung, whatever you sort of consider success. But for a black person to do that, they had to travel that same distance plus an extra sort of chunk that was laid on in the back. And that's sort of why I made that point, because if white people had to do 100 meters in that dash, then black people had to do 110, 120, sometimes 130. That's sort of the point. Okay. That the policies that were on the books made it harder, not impossible, but harder for blacks in these areas to actually do things. Now, there are a number of communities throughout the country that were black and very affluent. And it was because they had no choice but to band together. And when they did that, they incorporated certain things into their own communities in order to sort of make it. Unfortunately, oftentimes these communities were sort of burned down by racist white mobs, but that's another point.
Okay. I got it. So are we clear that that we do not suffer as blacks today from slavery?
We don't suffer from slavery in the sense that no one today is a slave, but the backlash of freeing the slaves is still felt through certain systemic problems.
How?
Well, this goes back to segregation policies and.
Okay, hold on.
Even honestly,
so that we don't argue anymore, I'm gonna make this real easy. How are blacks today, in 2020, June the 9th? How are blacks today, right now, that are living right now? How are we a victim, or how are we suffering from the freeing of slaves?
So the reason why is because in America, you have something called institutional wealth. Now, what this means is that, I'm sorry?
What is institutional wealth?
Sure. So institutional wealth means is that when you're born, your jumping off point is determined by your parents. Mm-hmm. So If your parents are, say, middle class, then you get to start in the middle class and you have a higher likelihood of bumping up.
Mm-hmm.
If your parents are poor, then you have a less chance of bumping up. There's a concept called stickiness at the ends. In short, the poor stay poor, the rich stay rich, and sort of the people in between roughly get a flux due to X, Y, and Z. So what you find is, and I will personally admit that this is an anecdote, my father, who was born in 1940, who was the son of a GI, got screwed over because they weren't allowed to take part in the policies that the government had created for those who served. So you have a situation where there was a generation after generation of people that were effectively denied being Americans, in short, because they weren't allowed to effectively, excuse me, they weren't allowed the same benefits that came with being an American.
Okay. That has nothing to do with the institutional wealth. I think you're talking about generational wealth. That has nothing to do with racism. And we have living people. Go ahead.
So you have to understand that these topics, it's not just sort of like one thing. There are a number of factors that play into the broader situation. And when you have when you have policies on the books that push certain groups of people into poverty, that poverty sticks generation to generation.
I reject that because you know who Madam C.J. Walker is?
I'm not sure who she is, but
you don't
sure.
know the first, not only black female millionaire, but the first female self-made millionaire. You know when she was, you remember her? You remember she was a millionaire because she created her own hairline products? You know when that happened? That happened in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Now, let me talk about, and by the way, she is one of many, okay? She died.
Hang on. I have to cut you off and just make this one point and then you continue. I never said that there weren't black people who were successful despite the sort of the racist issues that the country had. We're talking about swaths of people. We can't just sort of look at, there were some millionaires. We actually have to look at how that spreads out.
Do you
how,
understand
in this case, black wealth.
So, because if this was systemic, it will affect every black. You see what I'm saying? This is why there is no such thing. Huh? Because here's my thing.
That's not how systemic issue.
Okay, well, hold on a second. We'll get into that in a minute. If these are really truly racist policies that you just said, it would affect all blacks, not some blacks over here, some blacks over there, some blacks over here, blah blah blah. It will affect all blacks.
Can I give you an example of why this doesn't work? Why what you said doesn't work?
Why what doesn't work? What am I saying is not working?
What you just said. So you're suggesting that for something to be systemic, it has to affect 100% of black people. Is that what you're saying?
I told you. No, stop. You didn't hear me. I said, okay, I am going
to
get
off.
all.
You said all.
Hold on, stop. You didn't even hear me. Please listen to my words. I specifically say, okay, we're going to get off of systemic. I said that. I specifically said that. I said racist policies. I said, we're going to get off of systemic. Those were my exact words. Because I said, we'll talk about that later. And I said, if anything is a racist policy, that's what I said, it would affect that race as a whole. That's what I'm saying. Now, also, let me also finish making my point too in reference to generational wealth. Okay, if That it has nothing to do with any racist policy if the children of wealthy parents do not have money management skills. You understand that, right? That has nothing to do with racism. Not at all. Okay? Because, and also if you, and I actually done research on this, and I can go get the receipts right now. Okay? Just because your grandmother is rich does not necessarily mean that that the children of that of her children are going to keep that wealth. This is the reason why you see a lot of people who become millionaires, and a lot of them are black. They go broke poor within a matter of years. Okay? The thing about it is, it has nothing to do with racism. It has everything to do with wealth management. Oprah Winfrey came from a poor background. She is a billionaire. Jay-Z came from a poor background. Because you said poor. Hold on, no. Let me finish this and I'll stop. Hold on. You said that poor people produce poor children. That's not true, because there's a lot of blacks who were born poor and they are rich as hell. So I reject the premise that any of this have anything to do with racism.
Wow. Okay. So one, again, pointing out that there are some wealthy blacks that started poor doesn't actually disprove my point, but more in we're talking about things that you can't just sort of divorce sort of very important concepts from the greater whole. But
yeah, I can.
wow.
Let me, because I'm gonna tell you why. I'm gonna tell you why.
No, that doesn't work. So, well,
it does work. It does work, because you can't sit up here and say that it affects black people when there's black people that basically showed you that it can work. My thing is, if something is supposed to be against us as black people, because remember we had this discussion in the chat where I was like, I reject institutional racism because systemic racism. We'll get it once. Hold on, let me say it again. We're going to get on that in a minute. But the reason I said this is because when people start talking about racist policies, you are not saying that, oh, this is affecting a certain group of people in this particular area. You're saying it affects me and you as a race. And therefore, it doesn't matter my skills, my knowledge, my location. It doesn't matter anything. The fact that I'm black, I automatically get screwed by these so-called racist policies because of my race. And that's why I was like, I reject that. And if you can't show that affecting all black people, then I just basically reject it. And also, last thing, and I'm gonna let you counteract this. I have a reason why a lot of things affect some black people and not others. And I'm an example of that. According to the statistics, I'm supposed to have had 3 babies. I'm supposed to be 500 pounds. By the way, I have a beautiful body, very shape. I'm very fine. Okay. No disease, no illness. I eat very, very well for myself, and I do very well for myself financially. I'm not, according to the left, I'm not supposed to be here because of the racist institution and blah, 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 this, that, and the other. But I came from the hood. I grew up poor, underneath a single mother until my father took custody of me at the age of 11. If this racism you guys are talking about, policies, and don't get me wrong, yes, racism, there are racist white people, there's racist black people, there's racist everybody. But what I'm saying is, there's a reason why there are blacks like you, because you're in that category too. You and me make it, and there's a reason why there are some blacks who don't. And it has nothing to do with racism.
Okay, so we can actually, I'll make this sort of one point. You can respond to it if you want, but after that, I sort of need to go because it's getting late and I do have to be up in the morning. And we can definitely finish this conversation another time if you'd like. But the thing that you really have to keep in mind is that when it comes to generational wealth, the benefit of that isn't always, in fact, it's rarely the money. It's growing up in an environment that can actually give you that boost. So, for example, let me just give you sort of a bit of background. I was born to a single mother, also in the hood. I'm sure if you're familiar about certain pockets of poverty in the country, you'll know that Cleveland, Ohio is a pretty shit place. It's technically starting to get a little better, but when I was born, I'm pushing 40 at this point, it was pretty bad. And it actually got even worse in the 90s somehow.
Okay.
But that being said, I have two siblings who, when they were teenagers, they're like 10 or 15 years older than me. They had to actually go across the country to get summer jobs because they wanted to make some money. So they convinced my mother to actually move to this other area where they used to work so that we all can actually go to decent schools, because the schools in our area were shit. And as a result, when I actually came up, I was able to later go to college. I was working full time my entire time through college. That sucked, but I did do it. But the thing is that there were other people that didn't have that opportunity. At the end of the day, what matters is opportunity. And even if the physical dollars aren't passed from parent to child, the ability to give them that environment where they're not dealing with like cop cars driving on the sidewalks, chasing people with their pants down who were doing drugs or selling drugs or playing craps or whatever the case. Oh, good Lord. I used to see some crazy stuff when I was growing up.
Yeah, so that.
But the fact that you can give them an environment void of these things gives them a significant leg up. And that's what this is really about. There are a number of things that factor into success. It's not just sort of, some people might even say, white people succeed, black people don't. That's actually not true. And it's never been true.
I've never heard of that.
But I'm sorry?
I've never heard of it. Nobody has ever told me that white people succeed, black people don't. But then again, I'm a conservative and I only hear wonderful things that I'm able to do, and it has nothing to do with my race. So I never heard of that.
Well, honestly, I actually heard that on the Destiny debate when he debates some weird people. So feel free to take that with a grain of salt.
Shots fired. Yeah, I've never heard of that. I reject that. But go ahead. I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, well,
you were talking about the environment.
He debated some neo-Nazis, and they kept.
Yeah, I debate them too.
The point is that
they're pieces of shit. But go ahead.
The point is that oftentimes there's a model that we actually use in my background because I'm a social worker, and one of the there's typically three major aspects to the model, and your environment is one of them, and it's sort of when you put things out, if it's a good environment, you're more likely to get something that's good out of it. But it's a bad environment, you're more likely to get something bad environment. So again, this is just sort of an example, but I'm sure a lot of people had it. If you have parents that don't care about your education, who drink, who do drugs, they're bringing people home at all hours of the night or whatever, you're setting your kids up for failure. Mm-hmm. But even that sort of those sort of aspects come as the result of bad environments. There was I've worked for with low income families for 20 years. It's coming on 20 years. I'll be specific. And one of the programs that I was a part of, the goal was to get parents who were in some of these low-income communities to be part of their kids' education. And in order to do that, one of the things we did was we offered affordable daycare, because a lot of the things that parents want to do, if they didn't have the chance to actually go to school so that they can actually find jobs that pay more, is they can now take night classes. But when you have environments that are effectively screwed over by some of these policies that get their sort of genesis in segregation.
Here we go. This is where we're going to disagree. This is where you're losing me, because it's not racist policies. Go ahead. I see where you're going with. You're saying
I
that.
mean,
Hold on. Let me see if I can finish it because you're really long-winded. Let me see if I can finish your sentence off. You're saying that the environment creates the decision of the child, and these environments are created by racist policies, politicians, and certain type of whiteness.
so what I'm saying is that people oftentimes say the most important thing is decision making, which is true.
Very
But
true.
when you when a person is making a decision, those decisions are weighted due to a number of factors, and a lot of people like to sort of discount what sort of goes into making a decision, and that's one of the things that I always have a problem with, because why is it that in the neighborhood that I was born in, there were roughly, I actually don't know the exact percentage, but I know some people who sort of were able to sort of get out of it. Why is it the fact that there was like only 5 or 10% of the people that were able to actually sort of do more than just have regular jobs, and everybody else is sort of still there generations after generations?
Okay.
And you have to start asking, okay, well, sort of what went into, why is there a difference there? It's the same stock of people, the same or the same opportunities, but when you actually start to look at it, you see, okay, like in my case, we were able to move to another area that had a better situation. Mind you, even in that new area, we were still poor as dirt. But the fact that those schools were better was the deciding factor in that.
And
I
it's
didn't
all on
I
choice,
didn't
though,
choose.
and none of this have anything to do. This is now you're actually defending my position. This has nothing to do with racism. This has nothing to do with any type of white supremacy law. This have everything to do with choice, okay? Because you and I made decisions. We made decisions to get out of the
Whoa,
hood.
hang on. I didn't make a decision to move out of the hood. When I left the hood, I was in like 4th grade. My older brothers and sisters begged my mother for 2 years because when they were like 14 and 15, they weren't able to even get a job at McDonald's because the people in the area
Okay,
that
but
had
your
those
mother
jobs
made a
were
decision
adults.
to get out of the hood, correct? And so I stand corrected. Your mother made a decision to get out of the hood, correct?
Yes, but
Okay.
would you
So
like to know what she had to do in
no,
order
no,
to do
I don't
that?
need to know because the fact that she made a decision to get out of the hood. That's the key. You know what I'm saying? You have people who don't want to get out of the hood. My cousin to this
No, no,
day.
no, no, no,
Hold on,
no, no.
stop.
I have to reject that
No, you can't
because
reject that.
in
You
order
can't,
for us
you
to get
can't
out of the
reject that because
hood,
you haven't. No, stop. You can't reject that because I don't see you going in the hood and asking anyone would they get out. Because you had cut me off when I was about to tell you about my cousins and her friends. Okay. All right. She's like, I'm always be a hood bitch. I'm gonna die a hood bitch. I was born a hood bitch and I'm gonna die. That's how I'm gonna ride and die like a hood bitch. You know what I'm saying? I don't know any other kind of way. I also know several people that have moved out of the hood in DC, tried to move in a suburban area in Maryland, and they couldn't handle it. And they said it was too boring, too white, too this, and they came right back to the hood. Now, if you can't show any statistics of where people have been given opportunities to get out of the hood and they don't, okay, you can't sit up here and say that everybody wanted to get out of the hood. You cannot say that because there are, and you know I'm telling the truth, there are people who want to stay
I
in the
never
hood.
actually said that.
Okay.
You're sort of putting words in my mouth.
Okay, so
there.
but
I
you
do need
understand
to
there
go,
are
but we
people who
can
want to
finish this
stay in.
conversation.
Okay, hold on. But you went on long. Let me just finish. Well, let me repeat what I got. Let me reply what I got to say to you on that one. You're right. Your mom made a decision. I made a decision because I ran away from my mom. I began to get taller, and I was like, I'm not living this way. I refused to, and I ran away. My father got me, and he took custody of me. Okay, from that point on, actually throughout my life, I made decisions never to do things that were going to get me pregnant while I was in the hood. I made sure I made decisions never to do things that was going to get me on drugs, that was going to get me to open my legs. I lost my virginity at the age of 19. I stayed away from bad people because of the decisions I made. It had nothing to do with racism. And that is what every black person has that opportunity to do, is to get out of their situation. There are more grants, there are more programs, and there are more money for black people to start their own business and do their own things and to get out of the situation if they want it. But the thing about it is that, and this is where it comes to the left, your side of the fence, where they constantly telling black people that they can't accomplish nothing because the white man got his fucking boot on our back of our necks, and that we gonna be downtrodden. I would never say this to any black child growing up and then have them have this cage mindset to think that their melanin is the reason why they can't accomplish anything in life. That is just, to me, that's child abuse.
Okay, so wow,
and
your last
racism has nothing to do with it. We can get out. We can get out if you want to. There's too many black people in middle class to show you that they wanted to get out of the hood, they can, and the white man don't stop us.
I disagree with a number of fundamental points you made, but I really need to go, so we can try and finish this conversation another time. But it's been nice talking to you.
It was nice talking to you. and can we say, like, I get passionate, but I'm not. I hope you didn't think I was like, because I didn't call you any names. That's why you know I'm actually friendly to you.
I mean, as a general rule, I make it a point not to name call or do anything like that because I'm just not that kind of person. But
I do fit the stereotype of being a loud black woman when I'm getting into a discussion, but
yeah, I know.
But you notice that I let you talk and you let me talk, and I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for being good faith, and you're one of the rare people I'm going to say that to, actually.
I mean, yeah, next time I purposefully didn't do what a lot of people do, and that's sort of like come with a stack of studies, because oftentimes I've seen a number of people in a lot of these roundtable discussions, and that's not really my wheelhouse. They'll come in and they'll say, "Oh, well, I have a study that says this," and they're like, "Oh, well, I have a study that says this," and it's like, on one hand, you need to sort of look at research in order to really understand a lot of these concepts, because a lot of them aren't necessarily straightforward and intuitive, but when you actually get into the nitty gritty, they make a lot of sense. But when you're doing a live back and forth, it doesn't really help anyone to say, "Oh, well, if you look at this, it'll all make clear." Reports. I actually hate reading studies. I had to read a number of them throughout my education when I was under of people. One of my best professors was actually specialized in addiction medicine, and dear Lord, the shit that woman told. Oh, people. Yeah, that's not an area of social work that I want to get into, because those people are. I mean, they're sort of by definition a bit off their rocker because they're on substances, and I'm not sure I have that in me to deal with. But with that said, I'll try and talk to you later, okay?
All right, you take care of yourself.